When people think of World War II, they often imagine massive tank battles, grueling infantry fights, and the roar of planes over Europe and the Pacific. But behind the scenes, another kind of war was being fought. One that didn't rely on bullets and bombs, but on illusions, trickery, and pure imagination. It sounds like something out of a movie. Inflatable tanks rolling across fields, giant speakers blasting fake battle sounds, and radio operators sending out phony messages to convince the Nazis that whole divisions of American soldiers were on the move. Yet this was no fantasy. It was real, and it was called the Ghost Army. This highly secretive U.S. Army unit, officially known as the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, carried out one of the most unusual missions of the entire war: to deceive, confuse, and mislead Hitler's armies using nothing more than art, sound, and misdirection. Their job wasn't to kill enemies, but to make them believe in armies that didn't exist, and in doing so, save the lives of tens of thousands of real soldiers. For decades, their story remained classified. Only in recent years have we learned the full scope of what these unsung heroes accomplished. What follows is the story of the Ghost Army, the soldiers who fought World War II armed with paintbrushes, rubber tanks, sound equipment, and some of the wildest creativity ever used in warfare. The birth of the Ghost Army. The origins of the Ghost Army go back to 1943. By then, the Allies had landed in North Africa and were preparing for the invasion of Europe. Military planners knew they needed every possible advantage, and deception would be key to keeping the Nazis guessing. The British had already shown how powerful trickery could be. In Operation Bertram during the Battle of El Alamein, 1942, they used fake tanks and supply depots to confuse German General Erwin Rommel about where the attack would come from. Later, in Operation Fortitude, the Allies convinced the Nazis that the D-Day landings would take place at Calais instead of Normandy by using fake radio chatter and inflatable decoys. Inspired by these successes, the U.S. Army decided to create a specialized unit dedicated entirely to deception. Thus, in January 1944, the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops was formed. This wasn't a typical combat division. Instead, it was a hand-picked group of about 100 men, including artists, designers, architects, sound engineers, and radio specialists. Many had backgrounds in advertising, theater, and design. Some would go on to become famous after the war, such as fashion designer Bill Blass, painter Ellsworth Kelly, and photographer Art Kane. Together, they would form what became known as the Ghost Army, Inflatable Armies. The visual illusions. One of the Ghost Army's most famous tools was its inflatable tanks, trucks, and artillery. These were life-sized rubber replicas that, when viewed from a distance or from the air, looked like the real thing. A Sherman tank weighing 30 tons could be mimicked by a lightweight inflatable version that only took 4 men to carry. Within hours, the Ghost Army could set up an entire armored division that appeared ready for battle. They didn't just plop down these inflatables randomly either. The soldiers were trained to think like set designers for a play. They carefully arranged tanks, jeeps, and artillery pieces in realistic positions, lined up as if preparing for an advance, scattered around to suggest a resting army, or camouflaged in forests. To make it convincing, they added fake tire tracks, campfires, and even dummy soldiers. From a German scout plane flying overhead, it looked like a genuine force of thousands. In reality, it was just a handful of men pulling the strings behind the curtain. The sound of war, audio trickery, but the Ghost Army didn't stop with visuals. They also turned to sound deception. Working with engineers from Bell Labs, the unit developed one of the most advanced portable sound systems of the time. Using giant speakers mounted on trucks, they could blast pre-recorded sounds of tanks moving, trucks rumbling, and troops marching. These recordings were carefully engineered to carry for miles, making it sound like a massive army was on the move. The Ghost Army soldiers could even blend different sounds together to match the illusion they wanted to create. For example, if they wanted the enemy to believe a tank division was crossing a bridge, they would play recordings of tanks clanking on metal, engines roaring, and soldiers shouting orders. If they wanted to suggest troops building fortifications, they added hammering, sawing, and construction noises. To the Germans listening in the dark, these were unmistakable signs of an army preparing for battle. Radio deception, voices in the air in modern terms. We might call it hacking the airwaves. The Ghost Army had a dedicated radio deception team trained to mimic the communications of real U.S. divisions. They learned the fingerprints of radio operators, the little quirks in the way each person tapped Morse code, and copied them so perfectly that German intelligence believed they were hearing genuine transmissions. These fake signals were often coordinated with the visual and audio tricks. Together, they created a complete illusion, a phantom army that could appear or disappear almost overnight. Putting the tricks to the test, key operations. Ghost Army carried out more than 20 deception operations between 1944 and 1945, mostly in France, Luxembourg, Belgium, and Germany. Here are a few of their most dramatic moments. Operation Brest, 1944. In August 1944, as U.S. forces advanced through France, the Ghost Army staged a massive deception near Brest. They used inflatable tanks and fake artillery to draw German fire and distract defenders, giving real troops time to prepare their assault. The Siegfried Line, 1944. In September, the Ghost Army created the illusion of two full divisions along the Siegfried Line, Germany's western defenses. The Germans responded by redeploying troops to face this phantom threat, leaving actual sectors weaker for the real U.S. attack. The Battle of the Bulge, 1944-45. Perhaps their most dangerous mission came during the Battle of the Bulge, Hitler's last major offensive. The Ghost Army helped mask the movements of the U.S. Ninth Army, making it seem far larger and better positioned than it was. Their deception likely prevented the Germans from exploiting weak points in the Allied lines. Operation Viersen, March 1945, one of their final and most successful operations, took place on the Rhine River. The Ghost Army pretended to be the 30th and 79th Divisions preparing to cross the river at one point. While the real crossing happened miles away, their ruse worked brilliantly. The Germans redeployed troops to counter the fake attack, allowing the real divisions to cross with far fewer casualties. The risks and the secrecy. Although the Ghost Army was primarily a deception unit, their missions were extremely dangerous. Unlike regular soldiers, they carried no heavy weapons, only small arms for defense. If the Germans had realized the truth, the entire unit could have been wiped out. Yet they carried on, often setting up their illusions dangerously close to the front lines. Their courage was different from that of combat soldiers, but no less real. They faced enemy fire, air raids, and the constant fear of discovery. For decades, their story remained classified. The men of the Ghost Army couldn't even tell their families what they had done during the war. Only in the 1990s did the U.S. government begin declassifying the files, and in 2013, a full documentary, The Ghost Army, brought their story to wider attention. The legacy of the Ghost Army. The Ghost Army wasn't just a quirky side note to World War II. It saved lives. Military historians estimate that their deceptions may have saved 30,000 American soldiers by preventing battles that might have otherwise occurred. Their work also influenced future military deception tactics. During the Gulf War in 1991, U.S. forces used inflatable decoys and fake radio signals to mislead Saddam Hussein's forces. In a sense, the spirit of the Ghost Army lives on in modern psychological operations, PSYOPs. In 2022, the U.S. Congress awarded the Ghost Army the Congressional Gold Medal, one of the nation's highest honors, recognizing their extraordinary contributions. Conclusion: the illusionists of war. The Ghost Army's story reminds us that wars aren't won only with firepower and brute strength. Sometimes creativity, imagination, and deception can be just as powerful as bombs and bullets. What makes the Ghost Army so remarkable is not just what they accomplished, but how they did it with art, sound, and ingenuity. They turned the tools of stagecraft into weapons of war and used illusions to save countless real lives. For years, they were forgotten, their deeds hidden behind secrecy, but today we can finally honor them for what they truly were. Artists who fought with imagination, illusionists who outwitted the Nazis, and heroes who proved that sometimes the greatest victories are the ones nobody ever sees.